Hello and welcome back to our study of Peninei Halacha, the teachings of Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, Shlita. So we're back after a brief break. I had the opportunity to be in Eretz Yisrael over the past weekend, and it's always great to be able to be in Israel, to be with family, and to pay respects to those that keep us safe and that protect us, and just to recharge and reinvigorate the spiritual batteries, as it were. I also want to welcome aboard. We are starting, hopefully, welcoming a whole new cohort of listeners from MTVA in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. So thank you all for listening. And I also want to remind everyone to please continue davening for Chayalei Tzva Haganah Yisrael, Refuah Shlema L'chol Petzuei Yisrael, safe return of our hostages. And we learn in memory, Le'ilui Nishmas, Daniel Shemen Arav Durim Vasheli, Hashem Yakum Damo. And when I was in Israel, I had the honor and the privilege to visit Har Herzl, and I was able to pay my respects to Daniel's grave. Of course, we know that Hamas, the evil enemy, is still holding his body. They have only remnants that are buried there, but he has a grave site, and we're able to pay our respects there. But again, that's part of returning our hostages, returning the bodies of those that we have lost as well. And now we learn, including Omer Neutra, Hashem Yakum Damo. We continue our learning. The next is Yayin Mevushal. So this is probably, when it comes to the topic of Yayin, of wine, and non-Jews, so this is where everybody knows Mevushal, what Mevushal is. So let's see. Yayin sheis bashel einu nesar b'magagoy. Wine that was cooked does not become prohibited when touched by a non-Jew. However, ovdei elilim lo hayu menaschim yayin mevushal leileihem. Since when non-Jews would worship with libations to their gods, they would never use Mevushal wine, cooked wine. And therefore, and if wine is not even suitable, if it's not fitting to be used for that type of worship, then it's not going to be prohibited when a non-Jew touches it. If the non-Jew touched the wine before it was cooked, and the non-Jew touches the wine before it's cooked, then the wine goes through the cooking process, it's already usser. There's nothing you could do. You can't fix that by cooking the wine. So the poskim disagree as to at what point does wine become considered mevushal, and there are many, many different categorizations here. Lamaisa yeshnon shtei deos. He says, practically speaking, there are two opinions. Ladasa machmirin mishoshi ishtana tamo ba'ofan nikar, k'fi shekor la'achar shayan roteach v'shohal eish ad shahnozlim shabo bisma'atim ba'ofan nikar machmas ha'idui. From the time that the taste of the wine is recognizably different, and this happens after it's boiling and it's sitting on the flame until whatever oozes out from that, it's so recognizably different because of the evaporation. L'dasa makilin, and according to those who are lenient, mishosh yagir l'chom shemaschel l'shanos tamon, until it gets hot enough that it begins to change the taste. And he says this happens when the wine reaches a temperature of about 70 degrees. Because we know that at that point the alcohol that's in the wine begins to evaporate. And since this is only rabbinic prohibition to begin with, so we'll take the lenient approach. So we have an interesting question nowadays about wine or grape juice that is pasteurized. So they heated up this grape juice or the wine to at least 70 or 80 degrees so that they can rid it of any sediment or anything. And this is so that it can no longer ferment and stay with its flavor without any change. Some say that we're strict in this. They're machmir because it doesn't actually change the taste. And even though the alcohol content does begin to evaporate, since, however, in the pasteurization process, it's enclosed utensils. Alcohol chozer liyayin, the alcohol returns to its wine state. Umemela tama ein mishtana, and it comes out that the taste is not changed. And we should also consider the stringent approach. These stringent opinions hold that only if the liquids, much of the liquid from the wine, if it evaporates and it changes in a recognizable way, ein bo iser, then there's no prohibition. Mineged, on the other hand, yesh sovrim shehoel b'poel hayayin hagila dargas chom shemvashelas aso. They think since this liquid, this wine, reaches a temperature that has the ability to cook it, to be bishul, and the alcohol begins to evaporate, then it is changed from its original state and there is no prohibition. And even if afterwards the alcohol that evaporates goes and turns back to wine, nevertheless, since it was already in that mevushal state, we consider it as mevushal. In addition, these quotes from Igros Moshe, interesting, he quotes from Rav Avad Yosef and from Rav Goren. He says that the anine tam, which is a great word, anine tam is the experts, the connoisseurs, they can detect the difference between mevushal and non-mevushal. So the truth is anybody who is, you don't have to be a connoisseur, but even a regular wine drinker, you can most likely detect the difference between mevushal and non-mevushal wines. People who do care about wine will often, if not always, opt for and prefer non-mevushal wine. And since this is, again, a rabbinic prohibition, halacha kedas hamakilin, we could be lenient. And those who want to be careful can be strict. But even if somebody wants to be stringent in this matter, we should never come to the point where you're going to embarrass someone or to put someone in an uncomfortable position. There's a very, very long note here, again, particularly about grape juice. So, for instance, in our country here, so we have, let's say, your typical Kedem grape juice. There's a difference. If one buys, normally we buy, let's say, the smaller bottles, the small glass bottles, they're probably about, I don't know the sizes because we use not the metric system or sometimes use the metric system, but let's say it's the size of a 1 liter bottle of soda, let's say. Those glass bottles or the big plastic bottles, those grape juice bottles are considered mevushal. But if you use the large glass bottles, the huge glass bottles with the thin neck, if you look carefully, those are actually not mevushal. So one has to be careful with these things. But generally, all yayin is marked. All wine that we have that's kosher, and the wine market has exploded in such a great way in the last number of years. But every wine is labeled, and it says mevushal or it says eino mevushal. If it is not labeled, most likely it is not mevushal. One should just be aware of that. So you have to check. And if you're not sure, you could always contact the company. You can look. Or you have to sometimes look very carefully on the bottle because they hide the letters, and usually it's in Hebrew, to look carefully. But again, this is the concept of mevushal. Once it's mevushal, it's no longer in the category that any non-Jew would use it for libations, even though they don't even have that today. But in other words, in the principle of this prohibition, it wouldn't take place, and therefore touching the wine would not postle it from use. It would not render it unusable for a Jewish person. So we thank everybody for joining us back. Thank you for bearing with us as we took a little break here, but please continue davening for Charlei Tzvagan Yisrael, for Shalom L'chol Petzua Yisrael, safe return of our hostages, and we daven and learn Le'ili Nishmas, Seren Daniel Shimon, Rav Dram Sheli Hashem Nikum Damo. Thanks so much again for joining us. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you here next time.